Okay, so let's start off. Welcome, everybody. So this event today, this training is organized by the Quebec Inter-University Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Network. I know there's a lot of folks from across Canada, so you probably don't know the network. Basically, we're a nonprofit organization that was created in the Quebec University. So we are all Quebec universities are gathered in this nonprofit. We function as a community of practice, and we've been existing since about 2 years. So we decided to create this training with our partners. Today, we built this training with Fanny Eugène. I'll be presenting her later, but she's from the Fonds de Recherche du Québec. We have also Eve Langelier. She's a professor at Université Sherbrooke, presenting her too. And we also built this training, and she's not here this morning, Professor Sophie Brière, which she is a professor at Université Laval. So we want to give a special thanks to our sponsors for this event. Obviously, the Institut Edi from Université Laval, le Fonds de Recherche du Québec. We have la Faculté des Sciences de l'Administration, which has helped us a lot. And we have the Canadian Institutes of Health Research. Thank you so much. And we don't forget our partners also that are going to be there in the afternoon. So I'll add on with the INSERC. We have CRCs and New Frontiers in Research Fund. So just to give you a view of today, we're starting off with the main training that we've built. So we're probably going to do it an hour and a half. Then the rest of the time, we'll take some questions. It will finish at 11 o'clock. Then afterwards, there's a short break until 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock until 1:30, Fonds de Recherche Québec is going to be presenting, answer questions. Then afterwards, 15 minutes break. 1:45 until 2:15, we have INSERC. Afterwards, 2:30 until 3, we have CIHR. Then 3:15 to 3:45, we have New Frontiers. And at the end, we have at 4 o'clock until 4:30 CRCs. You have the schedule in the Eventbrite if you need to look through it. Hold on. We have simultaneous captioning, but we have a few problems this morning, so it will probably come through the training. We're sorry about the situation. We're doing our best. Our team is looking into that. So we'll start off. So presenting, like I've mentioned, Sophie Brière. She's a professor at the Faculty of Administrative Science. She's the director of l'Institut Équité, Diversité, Inclusion, Intersectionality, which is based at Université Laval. We have our colleague, Fanny Eugène. She's a strategic advisor on equity, diversity, and inclusion, and she works for the Fonds de Recherche du Québec. We have Professor Eve Langelier. She's at the Department of Engineering, Mechanical Engineering, and she's the chair of Women in Science and Engineering in Quebec, which is based at Université Sherbrooke. And myself, I'm Bibiana Pulido. I'm the director of the RIQEDI, so the Réseau Interuniversitaire Québécois pour l'équité, la diversité et l'inclusion. And I'm also assistant director of the Institut Équité, Diversité, Inclusion, Intersectionality. So just before we start, you have the part Q&A. Make sure to put your questions there, not in the chat, and we'll be going through those questions. It's possible that we won't be able to answer all the questions. What we did last week is we saved up all these questions, and we're going to look with our partners what we could do to answer these questions afterwards. The training this morning is recorded. It would be put up online in the RIQEDI's and the Institute's website. However, no promises. It'll be coming in the upcoming weeks. You'll probably see it, but it's not going to be next week. It's probably not going to be the week after, but it will be online. And I think there were some questions if the PowerPoint was going to be available. It would also be available in the website. So give us some time. We're pretty busy. We're a small organization, but we'll put it up in the upcoming weeks. So that's it. We'll start off. Hold on. So what we're looking today, what's our training plan? We'll go through the basic concepts of EDI. We'll also, look at a bit on the unconscious bias. We'll look into how we could incorporate EDI in research projects, how we could put EDI in research environments, and also to look in EDI in other spheres of research spheres of academia. So I will let my colleague Fanny start off, and so good training, everyone. Don't forget, put your questions in the Q&A, and hope you enjoy.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here. Thank you all for being here. So I'll start off with basic concepts of EDI. I know some of you have seen those before, have had training before, but I also know that some have not. So let's start with the basics. It's really the first thing to do whenever you talk about EDI to remember that those are actually three words that are each important, starting with equity, which is basically the fair treatment to eliminate systemic barriers that tend to disadvantage certain groups. So those may be present barriers, historical barriers as well. But the goal is to enable all individuals to benefit from the same opportunities. So it differs from equality. If you look at the image right there, equality means treating everyone the same way, regardless of their particular realities, their barriers. And equity means making sure that everyone has access to the same opportunities. So in this case, access to the race, for instance. We can move to diversity, which is simply the presence of individuals from a variety of backgrounds. Well, in our case, in the research ecosystem, that allows us to have diverse approaches, experiences, perspectives around the table. And that actually benefits, that's beneficial for everyone because that's what drives innovation, having different ideas around the table. And that's inclusion. Well, inclusion is actually what you do to make sure that you keep your diversity, or that you that everyone in your group or in your environment has the same chance to feel respected, to feel that they are in their place, and you need to pay special attention to underrepresented group because usually typical practices are based on the majority. And so to make sure that everyone is included, you have to pay special attention to marginalized or underrepresented groups. Next, we have a slide that shows the importance of taking into account each of these three words. Whenever we talk about EDI, often the first thing that comes to mind is statistics, diversity statistics. Whenever I talk about EDI, there's someone in the room to tell me, well, I have 50-50 women and men. So that's another problem. We tend to think about women and men when there are a lot of other aspects of diversity. But diversity statistics are one thing. It's good to aim for diversity. But it is also very important to pay attention to equity and inclusion as well, because diversity without equity is just unfair treatment, and diversity without inclusion does not yield the same benefits as if diversity with inclusion. First of all, you might have people that feel left out and leave altogether, either your lab or the research environment or the research career. So it's really important that whenever you think about diversity, you automatically think about equitable treatment and inclusive treatment. The other word that you might have heard It's not always always used correctly. I know some people don't necessarily know what this refers to, but they hear it a lot. It's intersectionality. And intersectionality simply means that you have to take into account the fact that each individual is actually a mix of different aspects of identity that can lead to privilege or discrimination. And the experience of different individuals within each group that we tend to categorize might be different because of those intersectional identities. You see here the wheel on the slide, which shows different aspects of diversity, different regions, different factors of discrimination or privilege in some sense that need to be taken into account. And intersectionality comes from the Black feminist movement. It was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw to talk about the fact that Black women don't have the same experience as Black men, and Black women don't have the same experience as white women. And that sounds very obvious, but it's actually not, because a lot of times if you don't look at intersectional identities, for instance, you may see that, oh, there's progress, women are progressing, but you might not notice that it's actually white women who are progressing in a certain situation. Same thing with racial inequities. You might say that, oh, in this field, you see progress from the Black community, but if you're not looking at it intersectionally, you might not notice that Black women are actually left out from this progress, and that's often what is happening. You can move to the next slide. So why is it that EDI efforts are so important? Well, first of all, in research, if you look at university professors in Canada, well, I think everyone has heard and everyone knows that women are less present in STEM subjects, so science, technology, engineering, and math. But even in sectors where, or research fields where they are the majority, let's say at the master's level, there is fewer and fewer women as you move up the ladder. So there are fewer women who hold higher level positions, including in the university leadership. And same thing for Indigenous and racialized groups who tend to be underrepresented. And again, you see it's important to look at intersectionality. Racialized women are the ones that are the most underrepresented. And that's not unique to university, and it's not unique to the academic or research field. It's something that you see in the business world as well. But not only, and again, it's not only a question of representation, so statistics, but women, Indigenous peoples, and racialized groups tend to have more precarious work relationships with the universities. So higher unemployment rates and salaries are lower as well. So those are all situations that exist, that are still existing. And it's really a myth to think that things are going to change by themselves with the next generation. One study found that if, for instance, for STEM subjects, we should reach parity at this rate, at the rate where we're going, we should reach parity in the STEM subjects in about 140 years, which, you know, is not that close. So it's really important to push forward EDI, to make efforts toward EDI. And the reason why we see those, another myth that exists is that, well, you know, women may not be interested in those subjects, or, well, it's a meritocracy, so the best people always get the job, so what can we do? But this is ignoring the fact that some groups face a lot more obstacles, that they do not have access to the same opportunities or for advancement. For instance, so some people will have to work throughout their studies, others will not. Some people may not be offered, may not be noticed for an internship, may not be seen for an internship, while others might be. And it's often the same groups that face those obstacles. And another reason why EDI efforts are so important is that we want to have diversity, because greater diversity is associated with higher performing environments. This is something that has been seen in the business world, in the innovation sector as well, and even in the academic sector. For instance, there's a study that shows that publications with a diverse, ethnically diverse group of authors tend to have higher impact, for instance. You can move to the next one. So that's pretty much why granting agencies have been talking so much about EDI in the last few years. And that's why we want to promote EDI, because the EDI efforts actually strengthen our research system, and it's important to promote diversity and inclusion from granting agencies, but also by researchers. And so we'll talk about this afternoon specific EDI considerations in different agencies, but basically all granting agencies in Canada are moving in the same direction. And that's why Bibiana had the great idea to organize this workshop to help you, I guess, respond to granting agency requirements. Thank you.
Okay, well, let's look at unconscious bias. So we'll probably go, we have a few minutes. We're probably not going to go in all the details about unconscious bias, but we'll go through the basics, see some of them. And we wanted to present you this model that we built at the Institute. At the moment, we are writing a book on unconscious bias in organizations under the direction of Professor Sophie Brière. So the way we looked at biases is through an organizational and social lens. We are not putting the focus on neuropsychology, since we're not the experts on that, and we don't want to, pretend that we are. So we really look at, like I've mentioned, on a more organizational and social lens. So how could we define bias? There's so many definitions about that in the literature. We could talk about attitudes, stereotypes that affect our comprehension, our actions, our decisions in an unconscious and involuntary way. And they're often with an unintended impact. So that's why it's so complicated to talk about unconscious bias. But as we know, we act and we make decisions that are often spontaneous. And that's why it's important to look into our own unconscious bias. Biases are omnipresent. They're really anchored in individuals, either in a positive or a negative way. But we tend to see unconscious bias more in a negative way. And throughout our whole life, since our young age, we've developed unconscious biases because we're influenced by that external world. And we are different spheres in our life influence us for our biases. For example, media plays an important part of that, because it's present in our daily lives. So although there are some tests to look into our unconscious bias, if you haven't done it, there's the Harvard Association implicit test. If you have some spare time, we invite you to do that test and make sure that you're well concentrated, because you're probably going to need to act fast with your fingers. But otherwise, it's really hard, to measure them. And I think that the best way to look into that is to have your own introspection. And that's why we decided to build this model, which is in three levels. So we have the individual level, we have the organizational level, and then we have society. And we see that larger, because sometimes we see biases that are not related to, types of discrimination. But, in this model, we see that our own biases do impact forms of discrimination in our society. We could talk about, discrimination against people that have disabilities, and that's when we talk about ableism, discrimination related to class. We could talk about classism, sex, sexism. So what's important to know is that we do have an impact on these discriminations. So as an individual, we do have an impact on the external world, on our society, but also our society, our external environment has an impact on us. That being said, it doesn't mean that, you say, oh, I can't do anything about it, just let's put it aside. No, everybody does have an impact. And if everybody works to be a better person, to be unbiased, well, I hope we'll probably be in a better world, I guess. I've mentioned, the idea is not to go through all the biases. In literature, there's more than 100 definitions of biases, some overlap than the others, but it's really to look at some of the, the main ones that we could see throughout these three levels. So one of the main ones in the individual level is our blind spots that refer to the way that we don't see our own biases. It's difficult as a person, as a human to say, to acknowledge that I'm biased. And sometimes we hear, people say, well, I'm not the one that's biased. It's the other ones. So that's what that's what we mean by being a blind spot. So one of the important things is to leave that blind spot, on the side and admit, we all have to admit that we all have biases, unless you're, like you have superpowers, which I'm sorry, but I don't think you have. I think it's a good start to start off with that. We could talk about first impressions. You could have a very good impression of a person. But the problematic of first impression biases is that when you have the first impression, it remains tainted through the whole relationship you're going to have with this person. You're probably going to be unable to detach yourself of that first impression. And as an instinct, we're humans, we're probably going to be more comfortable with people that are familiar, are similar to us. And, because it's much easier to interact with people that are similar to us. But, when people are different to us, we feel uncomfortable. It's difficult, and we do have to acknowledge that sometimes people are different than us. It's difficult, to have relationships, but we have to go over that and, really seize that discomfort. You have to acknowledge that there is this discomfort and then be aware of it and then move forward. So that's when we talk about first impressions bias. We could talk about stereotypes. Stereotypes, are really cliches that we have about a person or a group. For example, as we see it in academia, we tend to say, there's more professions that are for male or more professions are for female. And that's actually one of the problematics we have at the moment, and Fanny mentioned it, with the representation of women in science and engineering. If we go larger, so our mezzo level, we could look at other biases. You're probably going to see some overlapping, but if we see the similarity bias, it's the idea that we associate ourselves with people that are similar to us, people which we have a better connection, which we tend to appreciate more. So, you have to be careful with that. There's the universality bias, which is thinking that if you think that way, if I'm thinking this way, everybody should think like me. But the reality is that everybody's different. And obviously, we cannot think everybody alike. But the problem is that some people really remain narrow-minded and think that they're right. And the way they think, and it's the best way to think, and that they are right. So it's because also we tend to look for information that confirms our beliefs. And if not, if it doesn't confirm our beliefs, we'll try to ignore it or even discredit that information. If we look into the prestige bias. This type of bias is, we see it a lot in our academia world. We see it in meetings. It's the idea that we tend to be favorable to a person who is more prestigious, who is an expert, who has a higher level throughout the organization, who has more notoriety. We tend to be more respectful to that kind of people. And we see it in like professorial assemblies. We've heard it because we've done some consultations with professors in different institutions. And some of the younger professors say, well, you know, when we go to these meetings, when we go to these assemblies, we have nothing to say because nobody's going to hear us. You know, our opinion is not important because, in fact, we do have, in some ways, some people have the prestige bias. Okay, so afterwards, like I mentioned, you know, these type of bias, you know, we could look into them in a larger perspective. We could talk about gender bias, which is discrimination against women, and, you know, it leads forward to sexism. We could talk about racial bias. You know, we've been talking about racial bias for the last months. You've seen it with the verdict this Monday with the death of George Floyd, which will actually acknowledge that there was racial bias in this type of situation, which is extreme, but it does lead to racism in our society. Classism, like I've mentioned, you know, it's really discrimination related to people that are more from the working class. And, you know, we could go on with all of them, but it's really, you know, we wanted to present to you you know, the model. The idea is not to discourage you, like I've mentioned, but it's really to see, you know, in what it's anchored, what's the impact. And everybody has an important role to play in that. So, like I mentioned, not to discourage you. What do we do now? You know, we know that we're all biased. You know, there's different bias in our relationships throughout our work, our personal life, our society. But what do we do? I mean, I'm not here to give you like the special recipe or the magical solution because there's none. You know, I think, like I've mentioned at the beginning, it's really about starting to have that introspection in order for yourself to build that personal action plan. So, you know, you say, you know, I'm biased, you know, I've seen these situations. I'm probably more tempted, for example, to communicate, to have a relationship with people that are similar to us. So introspection is really important, to reflect, to review your judgments, your decisions, which I mentioned are very spontaneous. Another part of the solution, I say, like I said, it's not a magical recipe, but humility. I think it's important to have the humility to say, you know, I'm biased, you know, I have to move forward. I need to be able to receive that feedback. And I mean, constructive feedback, because even as individuals, you know, we could criticize people, but are not in a constructive way. So it's important to be constructive and to be able to accept that feedback. And one of the major impacts, and we also forget when we talk about bias, it's really to recognize that some groups are marginalized. Some groups, you know, they live some difficulties. So it's important to take that into account. I just wanted to put forward this video and this pamphlet we've done a year ago with our colleagues at University of Montreal and our research center, IVADO. We did this material with Dimitri Girier, Jeanne Lamouré, and myself. And the way we build this pamphlet is really to help you out in, you know, in peer committees and scholarship committees. You know, you have the different biases and, you know, questions to ask yourself. In Quebec, some universities are using it, and I think they're, you know, we've got good comments about it. It has questions of practices, job profiles, the importance, you know, of really focusing on the important skills, the importance of, you know, we tend to recruit to work with people that are of our closer network, but, you know, it's really important to go beyond, you know, to recruit in larger networks and really have a representation of people that are underrepresented. Like Fanny mentioned, yeah, it's good, you know, like we have parity, or we have, I don't know, some people are going to say we have 30% of people that are racialized. Okay, that's good beginning, but what's next? Are these people really included? Do they take part of the decisions? Are their point of views included? Do they participate in research? That's stuff to take into account. So you could go on the website and go through that pamphlet. It's in English. I think there was a problem with the change of the picture, but it's that. So EDI in our research projects. Usually this part is given by my colleague Sophie, but I'll try my best to present it to you. Anyways, we work together, so that's no problem. How can we look at EDI in our research project? We all want to have the solution. And one of the main errors, and you're probably going to hear from our colleagues of the funding and the granting agencies later on in the afternoon, is that we want that, that paragraph, we want that EDI paragraph, we could cut and paste and put it everywhere. But the truth is that the granting, the committees are not stupid. They know when there's the cut and paste, and that's not EDI. So just be really, really careful on that. Okay, so one of the first things, and that's what we've done since the beginning of the training, is really to be familiar with the key concepts. Fanny has presented you some of them, so make sure you really know what equity, diversity, inclusion, intersectionality, but we could go beyond that, talk about discrimination. Anyways, but be familiar with these concepts and really consider what are the realities of the underrepresented, whatever you want to call it, marginalized groups. It's important to know what types of discrimination these people live. We talk about bias, so it's also important to take that into account. Sometimes we think, my project has nothing to do with EDI. I mean, it has nothing to do with it. I'd be pretty, I wouldn't, take that for granted. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I haven't seen any project that cannot integrate EDI in their research projects. And my colleague Eve Langelier she's a professor in engineering. She'll tell you more about that. But when we talk about AI, it's new. We're putting so much importance in that, but we've really realized that, there's impacts, for example, related to racial bias. When we have a project, we have to take into consideration all the populations we're serving. And actually, one of the interesting examples that my colleague Sophie gave, because she works in international development, is for example, when they go in one of the countries, the communities, for example, they wanted to build a bridge, and the engineers, whatever, the team that was building the bridge didn't really take into account the population. They didn't take really account who was going to fetch the water, and it was mainly women. So it's things that need to be thought of at the beginning of the project. For example, now with the COVID vaccine, there's some articles coming out and saying, well, women are more impacted by the effects of the vaccine. So it's I'm not going to go through all the projects. That would be probably too long, but EDI could surely be integrated in your research project. Don't forget. Don't do that copy paste of the paragraph that you copy paste from your colleague and that everybody's putting everywhere, because we've seen it. Have a personalized and cross-cutting EDI working plan. Make sure that you think about what you're going to do, take into account, and have a view, how am I going to integrate in all my research project methodology, and so on, EDI. I'm pretty sure that if you look into it before, you're probably going to brainstorm with your team and have an idea on how you could take into account EDI. and describe how these questions will be integrating in your research plan. How is it going to be integrated in your problematic? Explain it through your research proposal. One of the important things is also to make sure to consult and include EDI experts, include members of marginalized groups in the project. One of the examples I like to give, for example, at the Institute, we've been approached to collaborate in projects with people related to people with disabilities, to people, Indigenous peoples. But we felt very uncomfortable on establishing that kind of partnership because we're probably not the experts. We're not part of these communities. And what we said to these organizations, these partners, you say, you really need to work with people that work with Indigenous communities, organizations, Indigenous communities, or organizations that work with people with disabilities. And also, like I've mentioned in the part of the bias, as researchers, we tend to work with our small team. We like to work with our same researchers, our same students, our same fellow postdoctoral people. But it's important to have a diverse and multidisciplinary team because it brings richness to your project, and that's important to put forward. Ensure that you have equitable, diverse, and inclusive access to all the researchers, but that's also, we forget, including the students, the postdoctoral fellows. That's important too. They need to collaborate in this project. Okay, so when we talk about the positioning of the researcher, the concept of objectivity and subjectivity, well, the idea is really not to go into that because, we could pass the whole day through that. But I do believe, my opinion, that we are human and we do have a certain subjectivity. And we could see it through the picture, in a project, we could see something, but everybody's going to see it in a different way, So it makes us as a researcher to be subjective. And that's when we talk about the standpoint theory, if you haven't heard of it. It's the way that each person has a particular subjectivity that colors their understanding of the world. That brings us to say that we all have this different perspective. Underrepresented groups have different perspectives. And like I mentioned earlier, people want to work, for example, it's really like everybody wants to work suddenly with Indigenous peoples. And, we've been discussing, we have a work group at the network at RIQEDI, which works on questions of Indigenous peoples. We have some Indigenous peoples that come and collaborate, and one of the problems with our partners or our colleagues that are from the Indigenous community is that now everybody wants to work them. They're been asked daily to work, but one of the main things, then we talked about that yesterday, is that researchers come to them, they got their funding for 1 or 2 years, and, they've included a part with Indigenous populations, but suddenly at the middle of the project, they start contacting these communities and they say, well, I have a funding, I need to work with this community, and we have to do it now. And because if we don't do it now, my funding is until a year, but and that's what the people say. This is not collaboration. This is using us. What do we have to do part of this project? Did we build that project? Did we think about it? And they say that there's a lot of research teams that are doing that. So just take it into account. Questions to ask yourself: is my research biased towards certain groups or individuals? Am I basing my research exclusively on my own experience? Have I consulted other people? That's really important. And really, when we work about the research problem and the theoretical framework, it's important to conduct a specific review that links the research project to the different groups, different routes that you're working for. it's also good, and I think colleagues later on in the afternoon are going to talk about the importance of gender-based analysis. Plus, when we take into account intersectionality, it's also a good way to integrate in your research problem and theoretical framework. Having group-based data, it's important, to see what population you have, see the socio-demographics of your population. So it could be related to the different groups, and it could be larger than the design groups by law, like visible minorities, women, people with disabilities, indigenous. It could be larger than that, but make sure that you really have a picture of the socio-demographics of the data you're going to collect, and really make sure to collect the necessary data and take into consideration issues of EDI in every decision making that you are doing. When we talk about the research methodology, it's important to select methods that are adapted to your research. It could be quantitative, it could be qualitative research. One of the things, for example, like I've mentioned earlier, we've done consultations with professors in different universities related obviously to Canadian research chairs. And we noticed, for example, that, when we were doing the interviews and we were asking professors to participate, none of them wanted to participate in focus groups because, it's really personal. They didn't want to share what they were living with other peers. So, sometimes, we adapted our methodology and we said, we're not going to go with focus groups. We're really going to go with personal interviews, take time with each person. And that really worked out. This is just an example. Break down the sample by group. I've mentioned plan the involvement of different groups in the data collection. It's like I've mentioned, it's throughout the project. So if you have people from underrepresented groups, if you have organizations, make sure to include them in that data collection. Co-construct those tools for the data collection. And, plan the sharing of decision-making power in the study, in the work schedule, in the data that is going to be generated, in the analysis of the data, and, everything, and even in the forms of dissemination of the results. Gender-neutral writing and inclusive communications. I think for our folks who are more francophones, we talk a lot about this in our francophones university, but also in English. In French, we do have, more problematics related to the grammar and stuff, but try to be more inclusive in your emails. Try to be more gender neutral. We all we tend to use Miss, Mr., but there's this question of gender identity. So it's important to take it into account. So make sure to be inclusive in your communication, written, also spoken communication, in order to include everybody and to avoid all expressions, that are stereotype or that could discriminate individuals or groups. So I'll let you go, Ev, for the next.
Yes, hi everyone. I'm very happy to be here today. I will talk about EDI in the research environment, so in your teams, for example. And you will see, I will go back to some concepts that were discussed before, because everything is attached. Yes, I was trying to switch my slides. So before, just to put you into the context, here are some examples where we can see that not including diversity can have an impact on innovation or research priorities. So my first example is there was this engineer woman in the 80s that was responsible for building a terminal for a ferry. And based on her maternity experience, she decided to put changing tables in the bathrooms. And that was the one of the first time. And now we see that everywhere. And we even have changing table in the men's room. Also in cars, many features related to security were taught by women. We can think, for example, about the hook to attach the baby seat car. Also this button you can press, to talk to someone if you're in an emergency. Also, this is not related to gender or sex, but Google made an app to rapidly take your video from your phone and put it into YouTube. But after a few weeks, they realized that 10% of the videos were upside down because there was no hand lifted in the team, and they didn't test it on hand lifted. Also, many drugs were removed from the market because they were dangerous for women. So they were tested mainly on men of the mid population, if I can say so. But women are not small men. Same thing about crash test dummies. The crash test dummy initially used and for a long time was designed on the 50th percentile men. And so women had more neck injury. And also overweight male had also more problem in a car accident. And Bibiana talked about it. But in EI, we can see some effect of not considering diversity. For example, facial recognition software that works not very well on people of color and even less well with women of colors. So if people are not included in the team that design and in are not included in the project, the design of the project, then there will be lack, or the innovation won't be as successful, and the research priorities won't be the same. Okay, so here, the thing I wanted to say is we talked about challenges, for example, or privilege, but we have to see that as not, for example, this group is all lives all the challenges and this group lives all the privilege. So, you have to see that as a population, as a Gaussian. So some, for example, women have less challenges than some men, but mostly, for example, this is just an example, but I just wanted to be clear about that. So we talked about diversity and why do we want diversity in our teams? First here, when I talked about diversity, I don't only talked about marginalized group, but also disciplinary, for example, or different ages, etc. So if you have a group of students that is diverse and has to work together, they will enhance their skills for the job market after. For example, they will have to listen to other point of view, and they will have to express their point of view. They will have to work with people working differently than them. So it will be good. It will enhance their skills. After, if you have professors, for example, researchers, research assistant, etc., that come from diversity, they will be a model for some students. So students will be able to see themselves in them, and it will show them that it's possible for them to go there. Also, if you have a diverse group of researchers, you will open for a I'm sorry, for me it's very difficult in English, a diverse group, pool of talent. For example, I'll always take this one. I'm in mechanical engineering, and there's a stereotype that mechanical engineering is about cars and planes and motors and things like that, but there's much more than that. And I have a colleague working on scoliosis, so she is looking at the mechanics of the spine. And this is mechanics, but this opens new opportunities for a different pool of students. Also, we talked about that. Our identity, our experience, make that we have different concerns. And if the team is more diverse, we will see the different concerns that the society has. So it will impact where we want to go with the research, where we want to go with the teaching, etc. Also, if we are a diverse team, we will have a bigger toolbox to tackle complex problems. And when I think of a toolbox, it's the way we see a problem, the way we tackle the problem, the way we see the world, the way we how can I say that? The way we model, etc. And our identity make diverse tool, but also our disciplinary training. So diverse team will be more equipped for complex challenges. Also, in a group, it has been shown that some subgroup, if I can say so, will improve the ability to communicate. For example, studies have seen that women in a group will make the group, the distribution of time of speech more distributed, equally distributed, but you will see the challenge that the women will individually have some challenges when communicating in a group where it's, for example, mainly composed of men. Also, if you have a diverse group, it will help reduce the risk of groupthink. If I make that very brief, groupthink is when you are all about the same. You think the same, and because you think the same way, you think you are right, and that can make that can bring really big mistakes. Also, many studies have shown that diversity on organization, at the head of the organization, or in research team can increase performance and innovation. Yeah. So yeah, there are potential benefits of diversity. It's not because you have a diverse team that everything I said will happen, but there are also many challenges of diversity, and many challenges are experienced by individuals that come from diversity. For example, they can have a personal problem such as harassment, discrimination, isolation. They can have also communication issues, for example, being dominated or excluded from a discussion. There are also, there can be differences in the preference in a team. For example, if we are thinking about where do we want to bring this research, do we want to go to Montreal, to Quebec, to Trois-Rivières, etc. If we want to go in not in the same direction, it will be difficult to bring that, to make that project. Also, if there is a lack of critical mass, what will happen is the team will not benefit from the identity of the persons of diversity. The persons from diversity will need to, make as they are in the group, make as every other one, so there will not be no benefits. from that. You need about 30% diversity, for example, 30% of women in director board, for example. Also, there is that equity tax. So now we want parity and we want to have diversity on every committee. And if you have, for example, like in my department, we are 2 women professors and 35 male professors. So if we need to have a woman on each committee, I'm often there. So when I do that, I do not teach, I do not do research. So we have to recognize that. And this is only a few challenges. We also need to change our habits. So if we want to recruit for diversity, we will need to do that differently. If we want to include people, we will need to change everything. So this is a big challenge too. Okay, here's a slide I picked from Serge Villemeur at Answer. Here are some barriers also of diversity in research. So we talked about biases. There's also microaggression. So these can be very subtle. These can be experienced by some, not experienced by others. So the same action, for example, they are not always, they are not intended. Sometimes yes, but sometimes not. And this could be such as we interviewed some trainees, and they said, for example, you arrive in a company and there's no security clothes for women. So you have all these men clothes that are very, very big. You look like you took the clothes of your dad, and it's not very interesting. So this can be a microaggression. It can be also a joke. It can be many things. So the environment, if you are a woman and if you enter somewhere and the only pictures you see are men, this is not very interesting. And at one point you will ask yourself, am I at the right place? It's not necessarily now at the moment that you will realize, but if you have a lot, then maybe you will ask yourself what you're doing there. A hostile environment, I think, for example, of meetings, if meetings are difficult and you cannot express yourself, this can be difficult. Also, gendered language, we talked about it. Bias indicator of excellence. So in grant application, for example, or in the progression, in the professor career, we have indicators that have been usually thought many years ago when the model was different and not adapted to today's reality and not adapted to many people's. And so we need to think about these indicators. And this does not mean lowering the excellence. This does mean what is excellence, okay? So we need to think about that. Also, there's not a lot of role model. I mean, also we think about the career really linearly. So, you're doing a bac, a master, a PhD, a postdoc, and then you go to academia. But what if you have family, children? What if you have to take care of your older parents? What if you went to the industry? We need to include that more in our indicator, for example, of excellence, or in what we accept, what is researchers. And also, many people from minority group are doing a lot in service contribution. Many women are working, for example, also in interdisciplinary research where you don't publish as much. So we need to take that also into account. So we see that there is benefits of diversity and potential also challenges. So, we need to diminish the challenges and to increase the benefits of diversity. So we have to create the conditions. So that's where equity and inclusion come. So we have, yes, if we work on the recruitment, we can improve diversity. If we work on inclusion, we can improve well-being, participation, and progression. And if we work on equity, we can have more equitable processes and more transparent processes. So if we look into these three themes, recruitment. So we can think about how we write a job posting and where we disseminate it. So there's the language, but also, I don't know if you've seen these research, but for example, if you, I don't remember the exact number, but you know, if you have a job ad and you have 10 criteria, well, if a man has 6 over 10 criteria, probably will apply for the job, but a woman will probably auto-exclude herself if she has less than 8 or 9 of the criteria. So if you write, for example, it would be nice if the candidate has industrial experience. Well, you know, you just adding a new criteria. So maybe you exclude more women. And you have to see also that different groups don't process the same way to apply to job. For example, I realized that if I wait at my door, that people knock, students, and then I take only the students who knock at my door in my lab, I will have only men. If I want women, I have to go in my class and say, hey, you're good at this. Would you like to do, would you be interested in a master degree, etc.? And so you have, you know, to talk and to say that they're good, etc. And then you will have women I will have women in my lab. So we have to think about different way of doing things. There are also studies about letters of recommendation, where we say, for example, that men are exceptional and women works very hard. So you know, you're not sure if she's excellent or if she's just working hard. Yeah, that's and you have to be sure that you have a pool, a diverse pool. You have to work hard to have a diverse pool of applicants. Okay, how can we work on equity? Well, we can work on minimizing. We have all unconscious biases, like Bibiana explained, but how can we minimize the impact of these biases in our process? How we can do the interview selection and hiring that is more equitable. For example, have all the criteria before you see the applications. Also have the same questions for each applicant. Think about your criteria. Do we need to have everybody that is star in research? Do we want also to have people that take care, that are more excellent in teaching, very good in research? We have many things that we can do here. Same thing, think about your process of tenure and promotion. Are the criteria biased? And same way, if you give responsibilities in your lab, or if you give opportunities to go to conferences, are you equitable in the way you do that? And inclusion. Well, we all, many people have experienced challenges, and people from marginalized groups often have more challenges. So we need to think, what are the challenges of my students, for example? You have to work on making sure that they are well included in your team, and we should you know, educate ourselves about managing a diverse team, and be aware of EDI and take training about EDI. So here are, we looked at the literature to see what kind of challenges or experience. So by diverse team, for example, or for people, members of a diverse team. And here is just some categories, to help you figure out what kind of problems can be. There can be difficulties when someone arrives in a lab, okay, integrating into the team. There can be also difficulties with the psychological climate, having discrimination, microaggression, things like that. You could also look at the way you supervise and the way that the student progress. Are there inequities in this part? If you have different values, this can be in the team, this can bring some difficulties, some challenges between the team members and also for guiding the team. Some students might have financial problems. For example, if you have to pay more fees because you come from another country, if you are parents and you have to work at the same time, same thing for their schedule. So I think about parents that need to go take their child, or some days that the child are sick, or sometimes you have sick parents, etc. Physical environment, of course, we think about people disabled people, for example. But when I talk about a physical environment, I can think about, is it all white environment? If all the people around me on the picture, on the walls, on the website are white or are men. Are there policies and measures? For example, is it clear in your lab that there's how do you say that? No harassment policies? Are the students aware of the policies of the university? Do they know where to take the information? And many other challenges, such as COVID, that affects more women and marginalized groups also. So I will finish with that: goals, target, and indicator. So philosophy, yes. You can think about, it's good to have goals, target, and indicator. Okay, so it's very good for a big organization. If you're a smaller team, I see more that like a concept, okay, that can guide my thinking. So goals is the way you express your intention. The target is what you expect as results. And the indicator is, after you put something in place, what results did I obtain? And I compare with the expected results so I can see. If you have no goals, well, I will see, talk to me. If I have no goals, I will not do anything because I'm very busy. But if I put myself a goal, I will work reaching that goal. So, as we said before, often, and it's just normal, when we talk about EDI, we talk about diversity. And when we talk about diversity, we think of targets of, I want X% women, X% men, X%. Okay, so yes, it's a good idea to think I will work to increase the number of women, for example. So I could say, I want to increase the number of designated group in my team. And then a target would be a number. Okay, that is great for big organization. And then 2 years later, I can see how many. But we do not want demographic data in the research application. Because what? Well, you listen carefully this afternoon. Maybe there are some differences. I can talk for insert and FRQ that I know more. We want a change of culture. We want to see what has been put in place to eventually reach a diverse team, and not what are the numbers. Because first, the numbers can just be accidental. And maybe you do things, but you don't reach a number. Maybe you reach a number, but you did nothing. Or it is also really, really dangerous to make tokenism. So, to use people, if I can say, to reach a target. That's not what we want. So what I propose, what I suggest, and next slide, please, is to work on other targets. For example, improving the well-being of people in your group. So there you can talk with the group. If you have a big team, of course, you can do a survey, but if you have a small team, you won't have numbers like that, but you can think differently, not just about the numbers, but also about the well-being. So that can be another target that you give yourself. And the last one is you can give yourself targets about changing the approach. For example, increasing the transparency of the recruitment process. So again, you don't have numbers, but you can say, well, this year I changed that, so I reached that goal. So my main message is not to use goal, target, indicator, is to have a goal, because if you don't have a goal, we won't do anything, usually. And if you have a goal, just not concentrate only on the number of people, and do not report the number of people in your team. So I guess that's it.
I'm back. EDI and other research spheres. So,
Penny, we have some problems with your microphone. It's you know,
again,
it scratches. Just if I don't know, try again.
Is it okay now?
No, maybe if you take your earphones off, that'll help.
Is it working now?
No.
I might be having some camera off.
Fanny,
Yeah.
déconnecte tes écouteurs et reconnecte-les.
Is this better?
Yes.
Okay, so I think it's time for me to change my earbuds. So Bibiana told you about how we can integrate EDI in our own research projects, and Ev told you about how we can integrate EDI in our research teams. But there are also other areas in research that can benefit from EDI efforts. So we can move to the next slide. So these are just a few examples of actions that can be taken by researchers or students to push forward EDI. For instance, well, I think Ev mentioned this, making sure that you develop knowledge and skills related to EDI, whether it be for yourself or organizing for others workshops or trainings, especially if you're a researcher for your trainees, organizing such activities are extremely helpful, and educating yourself about the challenges encountered by minority groups, either in your field, your environment, your lab, because, and this is important, oftentimes you will not see those challenges if you're from the majority group, because, well, usually you have to take into account that a lot of the times people from minority groups will hide our discomforts, will hide things that make us uncomfortable to make sure we don't make others uncomfortable. And if you're a PI working with trainees, there's a relationship there that might not feel like a safe space. So you need to create some kind of safe space or other ways for you to learn about the challenges encountered. And you cannot rely, for instance, on your students or your colleagues to educate you about this. There's research about this, there are workshops about this that can help you, but it's really the first step well, you've obviously taken the first step if you're here today, but it's really a first step in understanding the situation. And that's one of the things that I believe all granting agencies are looking for, so that the actions that are put forward are relevant. And that's why there's no universal or standard paragraph to answer a question about EDI, because what we want to see is that you are acting to correct inequities that you know about, that you've detected, that you understand what you're, why you're working on, why you're putting EDI efforts forward. Of course, organizing or participating in mentoring activities for members of historically marginalized groups is also a good practice. And what I would suggest also is to go beyond mentoring, which is helping people, talking to them, and move towards sponsoring, which means that you're not just talking to the person, but you're talking about them, you're promoting them, you're kind of helping them be noticed by others, which is really helpful for a historically marginalized group who often don't benefit from this, this light, for instance. Using gender neutral inclusive language was mentioned by Bibiana. A big part of the work of a researcher is organizing scientific events, so organizing conferences, symposia, seminars for your students as well, making sure that those are inclusive and diverse. And I'm not just talking about inviting a diverse group of panelists, which is of course obvious, but that welcome others. So making sure that, for instance, if you're giving a webinar, that there's closed captioning, or if you're organizing an in-person conference, which at some point we might be able to do, to make sure that, for instance, parents of young children are welcome, that there might be a daycare there or a room for nursing for young mothers, making sure that the place is physically accessible for people with disabilities as well. And of course, outreach activities, so organizing or participating in science activities for youth from underrepresented or historically marginalized group is good practice also, because to increase representation in at the graduate level, you need to start from very young in showing people that they belong in this field. So we can move to the next slide. Sorry about that. And one thing that really needs to be very, very clear is that there is no opposition between EDI and excellence. There's this myth, and it's often put forward, should I go with EDI or excellence? When in fact, the two are very highly compatible. When we work towards EDI, we're actually opening our mind, I guess, to see other types of talents or other types of excellence that we may not have noticed with our very strict excellence guidelines, or the way we define excellence. And by making efforts toward equity and inclusion and diversity, what we're doing is removing some barriers that keep us from seeing talent in some people, from recognizing excellence in some people. And I often bring this up. I like this analogy that I stole from, I think it was Denise O'Neill Green at Ryerson. When you think about Major League Baseball, there used to be a time when they would have a world champion, they would have the best baseball player, but all the African Americans were not allowed to play. So removing this barrier did not reduce excellence at all. We just were able to have access to a wider group of talented baseball players. And it's the same when we look at research. What we want to do is to remove some barriers so that talented individuals can be noticed, can reach, can have the same opportunities to view, to be seen as excellent. And so EDI efforts contribute to a stronger research system, which is beneficial for everyone, because research is a team, a community effort. And as we mentioned, EDI efforts are often driven by members of marginalized groups at the expense of their time spent on research. So I've referred to this as the equity tax. And it's something that is seen. So it's important to widen the community of EDI champions, if I may say, I may use this term, but EDI efforts should be everyone's responsibility because they benefit everyone, and the responsibility should not lie solely on the shoulders of people who are already marginalized. And it should be recognized when evaluating researchers or research, because it is an important component. And here I'm talking about EDI in the research community now, who's doing the research, but also EDI in the research project, what research is being done, so that there needs to be, I guess a group responsibility, a distributed responsibility, and that's why granting agencies are asking researchers and students to consider EDI, to put forward some EDI efforts as well. And I think we're moving to the question period now.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Fanny and Nev and Sophie, who's not there, for giving out this training. I'd like to thank again our main partners, the funding partners, FRQ, FSA, Institut Edi, and Canadian Institutes of Health and Research. Thank you so much. And also for other partners of the day, INSERC, CRCs, and New Frontiers in Research Fund.